Hey, you are listening to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health.
I'm your glasses cleaning co-host, Mark.
And I'm your other co-host, Billy.
Well, they can't actually, they can't see you unless they support us on Patreon at the $5 tier. So patreon.com/victims and villains. With that, I am apparently the commercial co-host today, Josh. But I will pose this question. What are you planning to do with those pies? As we get started talking about Killer-Klowns-from-outer-space, and we are joined by the director behind the independent film When You Are Gone, When You're Gone. Put too much emphasis on that. Sorry. Kristen-Noriega, how are you?
I'm excellent. Happy to be here with y'all talking about one of my very favorite fucking movies.
Welcome.
I mean, it is a classic.
Yeah. All right. Well, we met last year at Genre Blast. We did an excellent interview, but for those of you guys that may not have had a chance to check out this interview, the movie is called When You're Gone, and it is a kind of very cool atmospheric short film. It's very kind of weird, but deals with some heavy themes as well. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about what the film's about?
Sure, yeah. There is a young woman living in New York City who is going through a really shitty breakup. So she kind of spirals into self-destruction, and she's distracted from these sewer creatures that are coming out of the ground in New York City and kind of taking over until one has taken her hostage in the apartment. So that's the story.
I'm not going to give anything away, but there is some overlap with your film and the movie we're talking about today. In one sequence, is there any inspiration there?
This is the first time I've actually rewatched it all the way through since I was a kid, like itty bitty 4 or 5. And so much of the imagery was like emblazoned in my brain, but like looking at certain plot points in my short, it's a little ridiculous. There is definitely some webby cocoonage involved. There's definitely like creepy stuff coming out of your toilet, and it blows my mind that like those two things managed to make their way subconsciously into my work.
Well, it's always been that, people are always driven by what they've seen or what they've grown up with, and subconsciously it goes into their work. And I'm going to be honest, your short is, in your words taken from a few minutes ago, it's a great fucking movie. I like it. It has an alien feel to it with some other things, but I don't want to give too much away, but I do have a question with the storyline. And you said creatures and everything. Did you take any of the story or from the rat that was like all over the news of New York that got like really famous, or the pizza rat that was going on? That had a kind of feel of the creature in the background. I didn't know if that was the same time frame or not.
No, not the same time frame, but definitely the urban legend of like people flushing, alligators,
Right.
like sewer creatures developing over time. Yeah, I mean the super rats.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Gators.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Well, I know that you're kind of coming towards the end of your festival run, and when could people kind of get a chance to check this out, and where can we check it out when it eventually makes its way on the interwebs?
Sure, yeah. It's gonna be up on Vimeo within the next couple weeks, actually. And you can find me on Instagram, at kristen-noriega, and that's when I'll post that link as well. So yeah, it's time to put it out into the world. So it's exciting.
Check it out. Go watch it. Support an independent film. And with that, we're gonna take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in this show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Welcome back to the circus. I mean, abyss gazing. What we're talking about tonight, as we mentioned beforehand, Killer Clowns from Outer Space, which you guys can stream right now on a multitude of platforms if you guys have never seen it. I am kind of curious everyone's like relationship with this movie before we kind of start talking about some of the plot points and special effects and stuff like that. Like, where does this movie land for you guys in your lifetime?
I mean, I saw it when I was a kid growing up. I somehow managed to grow up in a very Christian and church involved household and watched a lot of horror somehow against my parents' wishes. So I saw this growing up when I was a kid. It was awesome then. It's been awesome growing up watching it, and it's still awesome now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an 80s baby, so this falls right in line for like the horrors of I grew up with, and I actually love the movie. I love picking on my brother-in-law, honestly, because he's scared of clowns because of this movie. So I always use this movie to aggravate him. For some reason, he's got a fear of clowns now.
I feel like that's not something that you hear very often. Typically, it's mostly people get afraid of clowns because of Tim Curry's Pennywise, not this movie. Kind of two different.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it threw me off too, but I mean, he's younger than I am, so it may have been because he was maybe 3 or so.
Yeah.
So
was he even born when this movie came out?
I don't know. I don't know. He's about the same age as my sister. He would have been born, but I don't know if he had seen it then. But yeah, this movie is a classic.
Sorry, we kind of adopted Billy as a co-host for being on the show as a guest so much.
Yeah.
And we're the older ones, so we get to pick on Josh because we outnumber him 2-1.
So you think, Kristen, what is your relationship with this movie?
So, as a little kid, like my grandma was my babysitter a lot of the time with my mom working and being in school and being single. And so like a lot of my very earliest memories are of like movies, just watching movies on HBO, which was a big deal back then. Like HBO was an extra feature you had to pay for. Not everyone had it. But yeah, like Killer Clowns from Outer Space, Nightmare on Elm Street, Legend, like just so many movies that I sat and watched. And I think my love of like practical effects came from too. Like I just love the look of these clowns and the fact that they're real, you know, like actual suits running around. And it's just like, I don't know, it's so fun to look at, whether you're a kid or an adult. Like there's so many bright colors and like even the way that they talk you know, I feel like a lot of it's almost aimed at kids, and it's a really like given your kid doesn't have like a phobia of clowns, I think it's a really lovely introduction for kids to horror movies. I was thinking that while I was watching it today. But yeah.
I mean, it's
Go
one of
ahead.
those movies. We talk about some of these horror movies that are like they lean into the campiness and cheese. And this is one of those movies that just it knew what it was from the beginning, and they just leaned into it and went for it, and it paid off.
I was going to say they did it so well.
I'm a late bloomer to this movie. I didn't actually see this movie till I was like 19 or 20. And I immediately fell in love with this movie. Is probably so I think Kristen, I think you said it correctly. Like this is a great like piece of gateway horror to kind of really step into and kind of like introduce the genre to it, to someone that may just be getting into it, because it's not overly scary. It's really goofy and comical. And we kind of talked about this last week during Salem Horror Fest, where there are certain films that you'll come into contact with that are in the horror genre that are purposely schlocky and over the top and goofy. And that's the charm and that's the appeal of them. And that's why I think Killer Clowns from Outer Space really works and has stood the test of time, to where I did a horror con last year, a creature feature, where I got to meet and interview the Chiodos brothers. They're lovely human beings. If you ever get a chance at a con to meet them, they're worth the wait. They are just phenomenal people. But they are, you know, it's a reason why we're talking about this movie almost 40 years later, is because this movie has endured it. It has, that's why watching this is the first time I've watched this movie, probably since interviewing them, where like I now know that they're in the process of trying to, like, there's the video game coming out, they're trying to get the television series out, they're also trying to do a sequel, and like there's so much more stories that you can tell like in this world. And it's a real shame, it feels like a real shame that we've not gotten more stories taking place in this universe.
Oh, it's almost like the longer the time has passed since it came out, the bigger it's gotten. Like, it came out the 80s. It was just another 80s horror movie, but you gave it about 10 years and it started to pick up traction as like a cult classic. And it's just built up more and more fanfare over the years till it's what it is now. And any horror fan knows this movie. We've all seen it. So
yeah, I feel like this is kind of like one of those essential like 80s horror films that everyone should see at least once in your life, because I think this movie is like, it's damn near perfect, because it's funny, because it's irrelevant, but also the same, to go back to what Kristen was saying, like this is like practical effects on just adrenaline. The sets look otherworldly, like everything about this like feels really alien and feels like a fever dream. But I think that's part of the charm, and I think that's part of the reason that you want to watch it and invest your time into it. And I think that's why it's been able to endure the legacy that it has been over these years.
And the special effects they used were perfect for this movie itself. I mean, they used popcorn and cotton candy and things like that fit in with the storyline, and the fact that the popcorn is the baby clowns and the cotton candies what's webbing them and eating the people and everything. Just, it's not many movies probably could do that now, but for what it did and when it did it, I think that's why it's one of the classics.
I think now they would have leaned heavily into computer for a lot of it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's hard to find. Go ahead.
Just that it has one of those like trademark B movie features that I love. It has a song like made just for the movie, which I didn't realize. I just love that.
Who wrote that song? I remember they said in the credits, and it was one of those. It was like, holy crap, they wrote that.
Keep talking. I'll find it for you.
Yeah.
I'm not super familiar with their music, but
Who was it?
I thought they're
The Dickies. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard of them. I'm not familiar with their music. Okay,
Yeah.
I've heard of them though.
Well, it's like, uh, before I say it, let me actually get the band up here. You know, only in the 80s could you ever have a theme, you know, that would work. And so like Dawkins, like another great example. Like most people don't know Dawkins, but if you say like, oh, they're the band from the Nightmare on Elm Street 3 song, they're like, oh yeah, Dream Warriors, I know that song.
Dude,
and like
Dawkins was 80s hair metal.
they were, but they've never outlived, to the majority of people, to the general population, they've never outlived the popularity of Dream Warriors.
Well, you also had the Ramones did Rock and Roll High School and Rock and Roll High School Forever. They both had appearances in them and wrote the main song for it.
Yeah, but the Ramones have like a bunch of like classic punk. I think you're missing the point of what I'm trying to say.
Probably.
And I think that's the same for like what I'm trying to like get to is like the, you know, Dawkins and the Dickies, both with these two horror films, Dream Warriors and Killer Clowns, like those kind of projected them to like the status of like one hit wonder, but like because those movies are iconic and classic, you are essentially having new generations that are constantly discovering those types of singles and that type of music.
I'd like to see more of it.
I'm curious to see where they're going to go with sequels. I didn't get to play it, but I had an invite for the beta test of the game or alpha test of the game they're coming out with. I think it's kind of one of those all verse one, where I think everybody's the clowns except for like one person or something like that.
Oh,
yeah. Was it asymmetrical survivor horror or something like that? I think it's called. But
yeah.
I never got a chance to play it, but I had access to it for a little while.
Dang.
Yeah, that makes me sad. You could have reported back, you know, knowing that past Mark knew that future Mark was going to be doing this episode.
You could have passed it over to somebody else that would play it.
It's been in like development for like quite some time. I feel like it was supposed to come out, I think 2022, and I think it's still not out yet. But like the Chiodos, when I talk to them, like the reason that they've had so many pitches and so many ideas for sequels and other stories to tell in this universe, but they've always kind of felt like it's never been quite right. And I can appreciate the fact that, you know, we're coming up on, you know, like 35th and like 35th, almost 40th anniversary of this movie, and we haven't gotten anything yet, sequel wise, but honestly, like that might be for the better if you're gonna be like sticking to it and everything.
Yeah, I was going to say I'd be afraid for them to do a sequel because most people that do sequels or remakes at this point, they don't stick true to the original.
Well, that's not completely true these days. They've started finding success bringing back old 80s and early 90s franchises when they did Top Gun Maverick. And then they turned around and did Ghostbusters Afterlife. And there's been a couple more, and they've started working on a couple more now, where they're kind of revitalizing some of these old series. Like, how long did we go between Army of Darkness and the remake, Evil Dead? How many years was that? That was
10 years, 20 years, 20 years.
Yeah.
So they're kind of seeing that there's money to be made there, which is kind of fortunate, but kind of unfortunate, because you know how Hollywood will run it into the ground if given the opportunity. Like with remakes, I'm pretty sure the biggest flop of the year is going to be The Crow.
We all know how you feel about The Crow by this point.
Fuck that movie.
to your point, I think the rights are reverted back to the Chiodos, so the Chiodos brothers, so they actually have like a full say in like what it's going to
Yeah.
be now. Because like I think before Amazon bought MGM just kind of kept like dragging their heels essentially.
Yeah, it seems like the ones that original people are involved in seem to come out right or close to right.
Yeah, I've got a chance a couple weeks back to see the Mutilator 2. The Mutilator, like the original writer, director, some of the like almost all of the original cast came back for that film, and that is probably going to end up being one of my favorite horror films of the year because like it has that level of just passion behind it, you know, and it matches, and actually I would dare say it actually exceeds the original from 84.
Well, you do still have Terrifier 3 coming.
I know. Right now my top one goes to my girl, sweet Sydney, for immaculate freaking masterpiece.
I haven't seen that one yet.
I want to see it.
We know. All right. Well, Mark, I made a challenge to you. We originally planned to do this 3 weeks ago, saying that I bet I could find mental health themes in this movie, and I'm ready to present my case, my friend.
Did it take you the entire 3 weeks?
It did not. I had story beats written within the first 20 minutes of this movie.
Sure you did.
Bruh.
As he shows us his phone for those that can't see.
If you support us on Patreon, you can see patreon.com/victims and villains. All right. So let's go. This is the first point. First point. There is a point in this movie where Mike says, anytime I want a good time, I call Rich and Paul. Okay. How many of us have friends that are Richards and Pauls, people that we rely on for not only healthy community, but also comedy and comedic relief? See,
I mean, healthy is debatable.
look, just because they got freaky with the clown ladies at the end of the movie, it's neither
They
here
did.
nor there.
Sometimes you got to take what you can get.
Look, they just, I mean, you could even open up in that way, where in that sense, like their entire arc throughout the course of this movie is simply searching for connection, simply searching for validation and love, and to be seen them more than just the comic relief, but as actual people, and to be validated in that way. Keep going.
Are you're making a stretch? I feel like they were the typical 80s horn dogs. That was the purpose of their character in this, just because that was common in 80s horror.
Maybe it can be both.
When I was a kid, I definitely did not pick. I mean, obviously, but there's so much sexual innuendo with those two that it's ridiculous.
I mean, that's it. It's the 80s too. Like that's a side effect from the 80s, where like everything had like an innuendo or was like sexually like driven. Like you look at like the line of like massacre movies that Corman makes, and they're so sexually charged.
Yeah, it was just it didn't really die off over the years. It just became less of a driving factor in a lot of movies now, and a lot of horror movies now. It's still present, just not as bad as it was.
I don't think you can make characters like Rich and Paul in a post Me Too world.
Yeah, no. Mm-mm. Unless they're there for people to hate and be killer fodder.
And they die first.
Or horribly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I feel like in a world where you have characters like Rich and Paul, you can't make characters because, I mean, by having characters like that, essentially, and Kristen being the female in this conversation, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like it treats women as nothing more than sexual objects. And in a post-Me Too world, you can't do that anymore. Like, I mean, yes, like it's goofy and it's silly, but it also kind of feels like it demoralizes women and kind of just makes them like paper thin, essentially.
I don't know why I don't like there's I hesitate to say charming, but like there's something that like it's harmless is also another like tricky word, but I don't know. There's something no, I don't think you couldn't write those guys today. But I'm not offended by them either.
But
I mean, go ahead.
we've kind of also progressed to a point where we have characters like Tree in Happy Death Day, where she's the main character and drive behind the whole movie, or Freaky. We have a handful, quite a few movies now coming out and that have come out over the last 10 years, maybe, that it's kind of almost reversed it. Instead of being the final girl, they're the hero of the movie. And Happy Death Day is fantastic. So
what I find is really fascinating is when you look at the history of horror, like the entire movement of like slashers and their final girls, that they come at an era that comes after the whole rape revenge of the 70s, which is these like really extreme horror films like Last House on the Left and I Spit on Your Grave.
you know what? I don't have a hard time with a lot of movies, but I Spit on Your Grave and Last House on the Left are pretty hard to watch, and they came out in the 70s.
It's just a movie. Keep telling yourself it's just a movie. Yeah, it is. Both those movies, I've seen them twice, and they are always hard as F like films to watch. Without a doubt.
They're surprisingly graphic for being 70s, even by today's standards.
But I think in the 80s, by having a lot of these more like goofy, like kind of charming, as Kristen said, characters that are, you know, the Porky's level of like horny, you're able to kind of get away from that because it kind of takes those like heavier themes that a lot of those early to mid 70s films went and distributed and then kind of turned them up. They almost kind of became a parody of themselves. And I think that trend kind of, you could argue, kind of continues into the 90s with films like, you know, Scary Movie and Scream and other, you know, films like that. But it's right around probably like 2010 is when we started kind of getting into these more like, I don't want to say necessarily serious, but like women felt like people with like films like Happy Death Day and you know, a lot of the films that you routed off there, Mark.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Billy looks confused.
I'm not confused. I thought you were going to say something because I thought he was telling you. But anyway, no. Yeah, you could see, like you said, in the 70s, it was harder and, a lot of the rape and everything. And then it's like the 80s, they did try to flip it so it wasn't so straight on and so graphic as much as the 70s were. And then, as it's gone along, it's starting to flip back to where it's getting more towards the graphic stuff. And we've seen a couple of those, like the first Omen, where it had that one scene in there with the birth and everything, which was extremely graphic. So,
I mean, you had a lot of films. Most of your cannon fodder, so to speak, were unlikable characters, or were just major at the time looked down upon type of character. So you had your asshole dudes, your idiots and druggies, and the girls sleeping around were all your cannon fodder for the killers. It was always the super innocent girl or her friend. The friend zoned guy were your survivors most of the time. And it's kind of changed to where it's more commonplace to see just like your normal people involved in them. And I mean, your cannon fodder is still the despicable people in life, usually. But yeah, I forgot where I was going. Sorry.
That's all right. I'll come in for the steal because I got more mental health. All right.
And you are younger. Senility hasn't kicked in yet.
I hope it never does. All right. So, yeah. Okay. Cool. So, as they're going, so the sequence where they're going to the, Debbie and Mike are going to, like, the cops to like report like the whole like death of the dude and his dog. Said, he says, he says, I wouldn't believe us. And Mark, you're gonna hate me for this. But I think this serves as a really interesting paradox that when you talk about mental health is even for as far-fetched as someone saying, oh, I'm feeling anxious or I'm feeling depressed or, and any symptom thereof, a lot of people, because we can't see it physically or, there are signs that we can't see or that are signs that we choose to ignore or whatever, because we can't touch it, it doesn't mean necessarily that it's not factual or that it's not real. And I think that's a lot of times where you have a character like Mooney that is always kind of throughout the course of the film, kind of the voice of doubt, until he meets his untimely demise later in the film. What you got to see is that there's got to be somebody that can actually see physically the symptoms of the mental health issues that you may be talking with yourself about, or you may try to get that out there. So
he did have an epic death, though.
He
Being
did.
the ventriloquist dummy.
but them using Mooney like that, I mean, building off of what Josh is saying, you can have that one person in your life that's always negative, always this didn't happen or it's not going to happen or there's no way that can't be true. Even when things are in front of them, they still won't believe it until he becomes a puppet like Mooney.
Also, like to build off that, like you don't understand the context of someone else's life. So, a couple of weeks, when Billy, I'm gonna put you on the spot if that's cool.
Okay.
When Billy first Mark alluded to this earlier, but when Billy started kind of coming on the show as a guest, he had just lost his wife. And, Mark didn't tell me that.
Well, that wasn't my business to tell.
It wasn't, but like I couldn't tell, but just by interacting with Billy when we recorded Crimes of the Future a few years ago, that's where he was emotionally. And it's one of those things is like you don't understand what someone else is going through, so be patient with them, and eventually when we came back to recording Nope, it kind of became a little bit more evident and kind of got to see it a little bit more, but you don't understand the battle that someone is facing internally when you're meeting them wherever you are in their life.
And a lot of people are taught to hide that. I was actually trying to go numb and hide it, not even show anybody. I literally shut off the world at one point. So I do owe Mark a thank you for that, because he did pull me out of that. But yeah, you never know what somebody's going through, and you've got to be open to just listen. And I've learned that the hard way. So
yeah, I kind of had to make him go do stuff.
I
was like, dude, you're coming out. Get out, get dressed, and come on. Okay.
I mean, it's fine. Sometimes you need that. I think that goes back to the idea of like community, and like why we need healthy community is because sometimes the community looks at our circumstances and understands and has a firm grasp of what we may need to, point us in the right direction, whether that is sending us on a path of recovery or becoming sober or, overcoming grief and death. It goes back to this idea of a healthy community and, also taking time to like understand where people are at, because your kindness could literally make or break whether or not someone is here today and gone tomorrow.
And with the community and all, you may come to a person that doesn't realize where they're at. They don't realize that they've shut down, that everything is just blah, until they come to the other side of it. And then they look back and see where they were. It could take somebody saying, like Mark did, come on, you're going out, or hey, let's go watch the fights, or whatever. You don't realize that you're stuck in that spot, in that position, until you're out of it. So
that could be a little demanding sometimes.
Okay, I'll use your line. Yes, dear.
You can be demanding. You absolutely 100% can be.
I fully admit it.
I am aware. That's why we've kept you around for 5 years now.
Yay.
You got a good life. Yeah. So that's what I got from, mental health from Killer Clowns from Outer Space. I think it's a great metaphor. Go ahead.
Oh, that theme actually caught me today, which is why I'm so relieved that you bring it up. Actually, the theme of isolation, because it's something I've been working with quite a bit, and it obviously formed my the short When You're Gone. But the isolation of people not believing you or not understanding you because they just don't have a frame of reference, and the isolation that causes. And more to, Mark and Billy, it's like, so when those times when you only want to be isolated and actually it's the worst thing for you, it just takes somebody sometimes giving that hand and pulling you out, and you realize once you're out of it, thank God. But it's definitely isolating,
Isolation is also really interesting to consider in the world that we live in now, where for the first time in history, remote work is something that's more accessible than ever. It's really easy to be a keyboard warrior and, kind of put toxic thoughts out there into the atmosphere. And also at the same time, now more than ever, also with the pandemic, it's now easier to just be by yourself as well. This isolation is a dangerous place to be from a mental health perspective.
And building off what you just said, post-COVID, if you look back, COVID drove so many people into isolation because we couldn't do anything, couldn't go anywhere. A lot of people didn't communicate, through computers or whatever. So they were at home alone, nothing else to do, sitting in the dark at some point, So being in this post COVID world, it's so easy to put yourself in isolation and not realize it because you've been doing it for a couple of years now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, also too, like it seems like I saw a statistic today about a lot of the protests going on with Gaza and Israel and a lot of the world issues that are going on. I think out of 50 states, there are 4 right now that are currently staging protests, and so that is one in a number of political issues that are also dividing us as a country. So it's really easy to like lose community because you don't see eye to eye with them, or you realize that, oh, this person sees this way on this issue, so that's now toxic for me, and you kind of cut off. It's really easy now more than ever to also lose relationships as well. So that goes back to the emphasis of surrounding yourselves with people that are going to be okay with seeing the world differently than you, but also at the same time also sticking with you and believing you in all of everything you feel and that you're passionate about, and vice versa.
I mean, with all that kind of stuff, I know people that have lost friends over differing views, long-time friends. I know one person that she's in law enforcement and lost friends because she's in law enforcement. No other reason. Hadn't done anything. Long-time friends with the people, and they just, oh, you're law enforcement, I can't have anything to do with you. And it's kind of gotten a little bit ridiculous as to how divided people are at this point.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, we have a mutual friend that we kind of had to walk away from because not only they completely changed who they were, but it wasn't because of their beliefs, but they went so far into their belief instead of seeing from both sides that it was either their way or the highway. So,
yeah, I wasn't going to get into him, but
I'm not going any further than that.
Yeah, it's become commonplace now to do that to people. You don't think the same way I do, you're gone. And me and Billy are fairly accepting people of a lot of things. And I mean, he just kind of pushed and pushed and pushed till it was better for our sanity to just cut the person off.
But you need a community out there that believes in what you believe in, but at the same time is not afraid to push who you are or your beliefs, to kind of show you both sides, to not say you're wrong, but say, look, there is a different view, different look. Try to look at it this way, try to learn so everybody can adapt and find the best medium, the best outcome for everybody.
Now that we're done rambling.
What are you gonna do? Knock my block off?
I mean, that was a pretty epic scene in the movie.
That's a great scene in this movie.
There's a lot of epic scenes in the movie.
I feel like as this movie progresses, like, and it gets weirder and weirder, it just gets better and better.
Yeah, I forget which one it was. I think it was the old lady that answered the door with the clown there, and she turns around and I forget what the guy's name was. She said, but she's like, "Did you order me like a telegram or something?" And it like in the window in the background of, if you actually listen to what they said, and it just pans to the clown like a shocked face. I'm like, oh god, I love that scene.
Yeah, that whole movie's just awesome.
I love the ongoing joke throughout the movie where the baby clown is just in the convenience store and is just making a larger mess throughout it. It just kind of goes on for like half the movie. It's great.
Yeah,
I love the shadow Those are like my favorite, I think.
The shadow puppets. Yes.
Shadow
Yeah.
puppets, good.
Eh.
You didn't like the shadow puppets?
That's one of the that's one of the guys that like is standing there watching that. Like everyone else is like amazed, and the camera pans to one guy, and he just goes, it's okay.
See, Josh was in this movie.
It's okay. I wish I was.
Then they try to hit him with the car.
Yeah. The possessed, I think one of my favorite gags in this whole entire movie is the possessed balloon animals. It's in like the first like act of this movie. It's so well done though.
When they need the hunting dog to track the dude down.
You start laughing because they back the car over the balloon animal and it pops, and it's just there. You just love the fact that it treats it like a balloon and nothing else.
Yeah.
I mean, the gags in the movie were just awesome.
Or they get shot and like instead of bleeding, like they explode glitter, and then they circle around real fast and just kind of like become like space dust.
Or
Like confetti.
you get, yeah. Or you get shot with popcorn.
Yeah.
I don't think there really is a bad moment in the movie.
No.
It's fun from start to finish.
And it's also like has like the perfect pace for a film too, where it's like it never drags, like it's constantly going, like even if it's like panning to like the the convenience store joke, or it's going to like the whole like Mooney, like, oh, stop calling about these clowns, you need psychiatric help, and or it's like it pans to Mike and Dave going like to like try and get proof and evidence. Like there's constantly a shifting storyline that just kind of keeps you engaged and just kind of keeps you wanting to know what happens next.
It's remarkable how short it feels. It's a 90-minute movie, but today I was like, that's over already? Like, you're right, the pacing is perfect. Like, there's no fat to trim.
Yeah, I was surprised because I've also watched it today. I was also surprised by how quick. Like for some reason, I remember this film being a lot longer than it was, and like just kind of getting through. I was like, oh shit, we're done. Cool.
And that could be just first time seeing a movie. It always seems longer than when you see it again later. Probably because you're not watching it as hard, trying to pay more attention for things.
Yeah. I think also like this movie kind of makes me like nostalgic. Like it's part of the reason that I like watching a lot of like independent films now is because you don't really have like the oversight of like the studio. But the first time that Mike and Debbie walk into the spaceship, it is incredibly elaborate how that set design looks, like the inside of the spaceship. And even the last act where they kind of face off against like the big boss clown, like again, just this it looks so elaborate, so like well done, and like just really well thought out in terms of how it ends up being. Like I want more sets like this movie. I'm
incredibly intrigued by the idea of a TV series. I don't know what they would do with it, but I'm on board if it's gonna be like that,
I don't know like where you would go, but I would love to kind of see like the world of the aliens and like how this like clown world would technically be. Like they came to us, why don't we go to them? Like that's the only way I think you can do a television series.
Or have them visit different worlds.
Ooh, yeah, that'd be good. You could keep that story going for like years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have them visit the Planet of the Apes.
Crossover.
Yeah,
Oh,
give
yeah.
it to me. Give it to me. Disney would never let that happen though, because they're a bunch of douchebags.
You never know. They got
That's not
Deadpool
true.
now. They got
That's not
Deadpool now, so
Deadpool versus the Killer Clowns.
I mean, that sounds like a movie that could be made.
yes.
And
Yeah.
it would make perfect sense.
Absolutely.
Because Deadpool.
It's Deadpool.
I mean, it's what else do you need to rationalize that?
All right. Well, I think at this point we've kind of exhausted talking about this movie. You guys can check out When You're Gone when it hits Vimeo a couple weeks. But Kristen, until then, where can we find you online?
Pretty much just my Instagram, as I said, at Kristen, Kristin, Noriega, Noriega. Come find me. And yeah, just follow along as we try to get the feature lengths off the ground. Lots of creatures.
Fingers crossed. I forgot about that. That's a good twist to have there. Billy, where can we find you online?
You can find me on Letterboxd at VABoy99. I'm going to try to do, like I said, better than Mark's doing.
New running joke for the entire for the movie. Mark, where can we find you online?
Like we don't have enough running jokes already.
That's fine. It gives people a reason to go back and listen to the catalog from the first episode until now.
I just have my nerdy stuff, miniature painting, titanium juggernaut painting on Instagram.
Where he's actually posting. So, that joke is sailed.
And I'm actually getting ready as soon as it gets delivered. I'm actually getting ready to start on a competition piece for June.
Hey, nice. Well, you guys can find me. I'm also on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia. You guys can find Abyss Gazing wherever you guys get your podcasts from. And you guys can also follow our parent company, Victims and Villains. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, YouTube, and wherever you guys get your podcasts from. So until next time, remember, the longer that you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes back into you.